Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome. This is the umpteenth Freethought Hour. I've lost track of how many I've done now, but I have another excellent guest. I'm really pleased to be able to announce that tonight's guest is ex-pastor and regular blogger, Bruce Gorenza.
Thank
Hello,
you, John. Pleasure to be here.
How the devil are you?
Fine. Yes, now that we got all that pretext stuff out of the way, and I freaked out a bit, but I'm good to go now. So
excellent.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Now, as I said, you're an ex-pastor, and now you're a blogger, and it's an atheist blog, I believe, isn't it?
Yes.
For the benefit of our viewers, we'll tell them the name of it. It's The Life and Times of Bruce Gorenza.
Yes.
And
yeah,
what is I was going to say, what is the platform that it's on?
WordPress. Yeah, I have it's a self-hosted WordPress site.
Yeah.
And I actually started blogging in 2007, and as a Christian still, and barely, but still a Christian. And then as my beliefs changed, of course, my blog content adapted to that. And so,
I'm just making a banner so that people can see where to find you.
All right.
Just with your name on it, and there we go. And I can scroll it. That's the name of the blog, and I can. No, I can't make it scroll at the moment. I should have done that a minute ago. I've left it too late to do that. Anyway, right. That's where Bruce blogs, and it's a really good blog. He writes really well, and I've been enjoying reading, not regularly, but I've dipped into it from time to time, because it's been going, as you said, from 2007. So
yes,
that's interesting in itself. Few people have blogged that regularly for that long. Is it every day or just whenever you feel like it?
Yeah, well, and I should say that I've had several iterations of the blog. In the early days when I first deconverted, I had difficulty psychologically handling. I got a lot of harsh, violent evangelical criticism, and so I'd stopped blogging for a while, and then I started seeing a counselor, and he helped give me some coping skills to deal with very nasty, very violent, very hateful people that would comment, send me emails and whatnot. And
can I say very unchristian people?
Yes. And I try to point that out to them, but they don't seem to get it. So, but yes, I've been writing regularly since then. For me, writing there's a cathartic aspect of writing, and I'm 64 years old, so I have a head full of stories over the years, and I've pastored thousands of people, and 7 churches I worked for. So there's a lot of stuff and I know all the secret handshakes and stuff that goes beyond closed doors that nobody talks about. And so, so far I haven't run out of content. Doesn't mean that I won't, but so far I haven't run out of content.
Well, I know how you feel, because I also am of a great age. I won't reveal it at the moment. It's a lot more than you. But I used to be keen to do things with my hands. I played musical instruments, and I did quite a lot of hand work, But now I've got to a stage where I can't do much of that. It exhausts me. So I tend to live in my brain much more.
Yes.
Spend more time thinking, composing, creating stuff up there. And I had a blog for a while as well. I was the publications director of Atheist Alliance International, and one of my jobs was to blog daily on Patheos. So you can still see that it goes under the name of Secular World on Patheos. Yeah. Anyway, I left that behind. I'm no longer in that role. But we've talked a lot about blogging. What we haven't talked about is you, because you're the interesting guest here. I want to know about your journey. How did you get to be the Bruce Scarenza that you are today? Because obviously it's been through a number of, to use the word you just used, iterations.
Yes. And, I was thinking about that last night. I says, how do I condense my story down into this, not a sound bite, but, and I can tell you this, I was raised in a evangelical family. My parents moved us to California in the 1960s, and they started attending Scott Memorial Baptist Church in El Cajon, California, and a rather famous evangelical pastor by the name of Tim LaHaye was the pastor there. He wrote the Left Behind series books and other things, and they made a profession of faith there and got baptized, and that pretty much was my indoctrination into the initiation, I should say, into the evangelical world.
So your parents had a big influence on
absolutely
your Christianization, your development of a faith.
Yes, and it wasn't just the religious aspect. They were also very right-wing politically. They joined the John Birch Society, and that ideology was kind of wedded with the religious beliefs too, and that carried forward, for years. And but long story short, we moved back to Ohio. My dad didn't find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow in California, and we started in high school. I started attending a church in Findlay, Ohio, Trinity Baptist Church. My parents had divorced by that time, and
how old were you then?
I was 15 when they divorced.
Mm.
And at age 15, as is common in independent fundamentalist Baptist churches, I made another profession of faith. During a revival meeting, went forward and got saved and got baptized. And then 2 weeks later, I went forward again and told the church that I believed God was calling me to preach.
Yes, in the UK, we might call that confirmation, but of course, in the Baptist world, it's born again, isn't it?
Yes. And I was. I had a dramatic change in life at age 15. Now, I look back on it now psychologically, and I say, well, what else was happening? Well, my parents got divorced. My dad remarried, married a 19-year-old girl and brought her into the home. I was 15, try to figure that one out. Yes. And, my mom remarried, and she married her first cousin who just got out of prison from bank robbery. And so they all stopped going to church. But for me, as I look at it, if I want to give credit to the church, I'd say the church provided me emotional support. It provided me a place to belong. All my friends were there.
Yes. It was your family, wasn't it, when your real family was cracking up? I know more than one person who's gone through something similar to that. A friend of mine in Australia who nearly became a pastor. He did all the training, and then just before his finals, he read the Bible and decided no. It's surprising how many atheists the Bible makes.
Yes.
That's what happened to him. But the reason he got into the church in the first place was just like you. His family fell apart, and he was looking for somewhere to be as a
Yes.
teenager.
Yes.
You know, you need a foundation, don't you? A substance to bounce off when your teenage is bad enough, isn't it?
Right.
Without having your foundation kicked out from underneath you.
Well, and you know, look, the church I attended had services 3 times a week, and then we had youth group, and then there were special meetings, and you know, then they had sports teams they sponsored. It was a big church, and I had friends there, girls I dated, and whatnot. So my whole life as a teenager revolved around the church. So
Yes.
I never had to be home. I didn't have to deal with the family problems and you know, and so from there, you know, at the age of 19, and there's a lot more to that story, but age 19, I moved to Pontiac, Michigan, and started attending Midwestern Baptist College. It was a independent fundamentalist Baptist college, about 400 students, I think, at the time, and that's where I met my wife. You know, and she was a preacher's daughter, and she was there. She'll tell you, to get her MRS degree. She was looking for a preacher to marry, and yes, and I was that preacher.
Yes.
Her mom didn't like her choice, but
they often don't.
Well, we've had a lot of acrimonious relationship over the years, and I snarkily told Polly last Sunday when she was talking to her mom, "You can tell your mom that I won. Yeah, please tell her I won." You know. So
this wife is the Polly that you're still with.
Yes, 43 years.
Wow. Yes, I'm impressed. Yep.
Yeah, we have 6 kids, 13 grandchildren. So
you've not been idle.
No, and I would say that we're happily married 98.9% of the time.
Well, that's higher than most ratings.
It's that other 1.1% though that sure makes life interesting. So,
yes. So what was it after, you know, being so sort of wedded to the church as a bit of a lost soul when your family broke up? What was it that you were on the road to becoming a pastor, and then you were a pastor in a number of churches? What was it that cracked that mold, as it were?
Well, you go to 2003. That's the last time I pastored. So it's been, you know, almost 18 years since I pastored a church. I was pastoring a Southern Baptist church up in Clare, Michigan, and never should have took the church to start with. It was so dysfunctional, and I just didn't. I remember when I went there, I told the church, I said, "Now look," I said, "I'm not going to fight with you." I just didn't have that in me anymore, to have that constant battle and strife, you know, to get simplest things done, and disagreements, and having to referee problems between people and whatnot. And so I was just tired, I think, from that. And so after I left that church, you know, I just said, you know, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And so that kind of put us on a path. We started looking for a church to attend, you know, a place we could call home, and use what gifts we had, you know, to serve God in those churches. And we went to, all told, and from late 2002 to 2008, we went to 125 different churches.
Wow.
And so I could write a book just about that. And and we concluded at the end that, as we got towards the end, that, you know, it didn't matter what the name was over the door. It didn't matter, you know, what the beliefs were. You know, every church was pretty much the same. And we went to everything from Greek Orthodox to Catholic to Baptist to Presbyterian, Methodist, Episcopalian, The last church we attended before we left Christianity was a United Methodist church in town here, and so we got to see Christianity from a lot of different vantage points, and we just had a hard time. And in retrospect, we will admit that we had a really high standard for what we were looking for. We wanted a church where they took Christianity seriously and where those things mattered, and it was almost impossible to find. Churches are pretty much social clubs, and I don't care what the name is, and that's not a problem if as long as that's what you're selling, but that's not what you're selling, of course, and so from there, that emotional and psychological upheaval that we were going through, I reached a place where I said, I want to take a look at my beliefs again. And so that's where it started. And I started reading, Bart Ehrman in particular is one who, his books, I read every book that was available at that time, and he literally destroyed my worldview because, I believed up until that point that the Bible was the inspired, inerrant, infallible Word of God. And his books, it's impossible to read them and come away saying the Bible is inerrant. Yes. And so if the Bible has errors in it, if it has contradictions in it, then what about these things that I say I believe? Yep. And from that point, it was just like dominoes, falling, one belief after another. And my wife, she was along here with me. She was reading some of these books, and we would spend hours at night laying in bed just talking about this and that. And it wasn't just Bart. It was, I knew nothing. You have a science background. I knew literally nothing about science. Right. I mean, look, John, I can't emphasize that enough. I did know how birth control worked, kind of. But outside of that, my whole science view was, well, Genesis 1-3, God did it, and anything I can't explain, that just means it's a mystery.
Well, I'm not surprised because, of course, religions don't like education, do they? There's recently been a Jewish rabbi having a bit of a rant. He's on social media, or he's been reported in the news somewhere. He's having a bit of a rant because, of course, Israel has just got a new government. And the new government is changing the rules for education. They're saying that science has to be a core subject, and he perceives this as a bit of a threat, of course. So he's saying science is nonsense. I never got a degree or even passed matriculation. I haven't got a certificate to my name, and look at me now. He's proud of his ignorance. How weird is that?
Yeah, and I would have been the same way. My entire science upbringing, teaching that in school was I took high school biology, which I barely passed, and then I took biology in college, which consisted of, I kid you not, he read out of a textbook from Bob Jones University. There was no lab. We sat there for lectures, and the only thing that I remember him lecturing on was how you should marry after your own kind. Hint, hint. Okay. And because, the Bible says, this and that. And of course, I now know that he was saying that whites should marry whites. And I'm sure by extension, Baptists should marry Baptists, and Catholics, Catholics. And and so that was it for me, education-wise. Now, I had several books in my library as a pastor that all they did is defend the young creationist worldview. So I never read anything that was outside of that framework. And so, when I read like Jerry Coyne's book, Why Evolution is True.
Yeah, great book.
Phenomenal book that just, I didn't know anything. And so I still don't know much because kind of got started late at this little educational process. But, I do know more now than I did then. And so it was a lot of things like that, John, that, we finally reached a place in November of 2008, where I said, I'm just not I can't call myself a Christian anymore. I still had a slight God in my thinking. I reread something I sent to our family when we left Christianity. I wrote it in early 2009, and I say in there, here's what I believe: God is. And that's all I said. But that didn't last very long. The more I read, and by the middle of 2009, I was calling myself an atheist. My wife was calling herself an agnostic, and we've not those viewpoints have not become we've become harder in those viewpoints over time, and so that's how I got to where I am in a very short telling of the story. Yes.
Well, you mentioned Jerry Coyne and his books like Faith Not Fact. Here's another Jerry Coyne fan. Frank Lovell is one of our regular viewers who's residing in Kentucky, and I think in his picture, he may be holding a Jerry Coyne book. If not, it's a similar sort of scientific tome. So he says, this isn't a question, but he says, if only it was that easy for other believers, to come to see the problems with what the Bible plainly says when read the way people read other books.
Right. And he's exactly right.
Yeah. Because if you read the Bible from a point of view of wanting to believe it, then you're not criticizing it, are you? You're accepting it before you've read it.
Well, yeah, and that's right. And so, because I believed in the inerrancy of the Bible, anything that I couldn't understand, I had two answers to every question like that. God in time will make that known to me. I just don't know. Or, it's just ignorance on my part. And, I need to study the Bible more or read. I have lots of books, John. I had over 1,000 books in my library. I love to read, but they all were kind of in the same rut of authors and beliefs and, and so it took seeing that inerrancy wasn't true for me to have any hope of seeing anything else. I've often pondered it. If I had started the ministry, because I generally love people and want to help them, and if I had started the ministry in the Anglican Church, for example, and had a more liberal education, and I've met Anglican priests who are every bit as atheist as I am, and so would I have been in the ministry still if I had taken that path? Well, maybe,
yes.
But I took the other path, and so here I am.
Yes, it's a comfortable church to be in.
Yes.
You don't have to believe anything. You just go through the motions.
Yes, and I can tell a quick story. We, on and off, attended the Episcopal Church in nearby town here, and I remember our first Sunday there, one of the matriarchs of the church came up and shook our hands and said, Now, in our church, you can believe whatever you want to believe. And I was so taken aback by that, because that was definitely foreign to me. But, we attended there, sporadically. I liked the priest's sermons and
yes.
homilies, I guess. And but it always struck me as funny. That you could just believe whatever you want.
That's right. Well, it is more of a social club than most churches, but the cake is good sometimes.
Yes. Well, there certainly Anglican priests make a lot more money than I ever did. Yeah, in the ministry. So.
Well, I'm not sure that many Anglican priests over here would agree with that.
So.
Anyway. What's interesting to me now is, how do you look back at your former self? What do you think about that Bruce that believed in the Bible?
Well,
that Bruce that did all the preaching and praying.
Sure. And I'm kind of a reflective kind of guy to start with, and so, I see myself in several different ways. One, I genuinely helped a lot of people, particularly, when I pastored in Southeast Ohio. We were in one church there for 11 years, and a lot of poverty, a lot of family dysfunction and whatnot. I think I genuinely help people, but I also have to own the fact that my preaching was harmful, that the things I believed, the things that I taught others to believe, caused psychological harm, and really? in some cases, physical harm. When you teach from the Old Testament about, you shouldn't spare the rod.
Yes.
Well, I had one man I remember that, he believed that. Bless God, that's what the Bible said. And unfortunately, he beat the daylights out of his children. Yes. And even in my, and some of my kids are watching this, I believe, and they know, because we've had this discussion, that if I look back on the discipline that I meted out to my kids, I would call that child abuse today. I just would. Yeah. I mean, because now that was what was modeled to me. That's the kind of, early in my life, my mother, never my dad, but, and so, I can find all sorts of justifications, but the bottom line is that, it's my three oldest kids I lost heart for that kind of discipline, with my younger kids. But my three oldest sons, in particular, I expected them to toe the line. And when they didn't, they got spanked or, things like that. And my one time, my second oldest son tells the story that, one time I spanked him with a book. And I had picked up this book by John R. Rice, and it was a book on the family. And so he got a spanking with a book on the family. And it's not lost on me how crazy that is. Yeah. And I was the primary disciplinarian in the home. My wife was the caretaker, the nurturer, I was the stern father. Yes. And I regret that. But John, there's not much all you can do is say, I'm sorry, and try to model a better way. I try to talk about that stuff in my writing, that, look, beating on kids is wrong. It's morally wrong to do that. Yeah. And so I look at my past. I see several different Bruces, and so there are a lot of things I see that I'm, we had a good life. We enjoyed life. We were relatively happy as a pastor and his wife and his family. But then there's the other sides of certain aspects of teaching the literal word of God. We take it literally. Every word is true. And this is how we have to interpret it, and how those beliefs worked out in the lives of people and worked out in my own life. It's not healthy. And
no. Well, you're right. It's funny, isn't it, how I suppose it's because of their ancient origin when cultures were different. But religions still today are very authoritarian, aren't they?
Yes,
absolutely. They're very much in the rule in the mode of there's got to be a boss and he's got to exert his power downwards. It comes from the days of barons and rulers who ruled by force. And if you didn't worship them, then you suffered.
Yes. Well, in the independent fundamentalist Baptist church movement, authoritarianism is the standard, not the exception. And so I was taught to be an authoritarian. You're the man of God. You're anointed by God. You're called by God. And and there are verses in the Bible that teach, at least from an independent fundamentalist Baptist interpretation of them, that church members are to submit to that authority. That you're a ruler, an elder, a bishop, all these different terms that are used in the Bible, but nonetheless, church members were expected to obey and follow your leading. And of course that, worked its way down to your wife and to your children. And, and so I was this, I was the head honcho. I was the man in charge. And,
the thinking was somebody had to be. And I point this upwards. I think, that it's a hierarchical system is sort of endemic within a church or a religion. There's got to be layers of people who are bosses of each other. And of course, right at the top, there's a really big boss.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's where
unfortunately, in churches, in a lot of churches, the only person people see are the preacher. They don't see that big guy upstairs. It's I was the hub around which everything operated. And now it wasn't always that way for me. As I got older and longer in the ministry, I started realizing that, some of that wasn't healthy. And, but still, even at the end, I was more authoritarian than I should have been. And but certainly different than when I was 22 years old.
But you've mellowed.
Yes. Well, age and health problems will do that to you.
Yes, that's right. Yes, indeed.
Yes.
But it's not just the Baptist movement. It's not even just Christianity, is it? Because you see this in all religions. For example, in the last week, we've had an item of news here in the UK because we've got an Office for Standards in Education, Ofsted, that goes around inspecting schools and checking on whether they're being effective at delivering the education that children need. And they went to a Muslim boarding school. We have those things in this country because we've had quite a lot of immigration from the former colonies, now the Commonwealth, and other locations. And many of them have brought their religions with them and set up little enclaves here in England. So it's no longer the preserve of the Anglican Church solely anymore. And so Ofsted went to this Muslim boarding school and claimed that it undermined British values by allowing its library to stock a book calling for homosexual people to be punished.
Yeah.
The book, which is called Islam on Homosexuality, included inappropriate content unsuitable for pupils, excerpts from the text, which had been stamped as an official library book by the school, included sections on punishment of individuals because of their sexuality. And the report noted there's also a paragraph in the book entitled Putting to Death. The evildoers should be put to death. Well, there you go. So it's a common thing for religions to spread that sort of harm. It's not just the religion that you were in.
Well, and I've had the church I pastored in Southeast Ohio for 11 years. We had a private school, and just for church children. The poverty was such there that, you know, we didn't charge tuition. You know, parents just bought the books, and you know, but ironically, in that school, later in life, 3 of the 15 students are now gay. And in a church where their pastor was as homophobic as you could be, you know, I very clear from the pulpit and everything that we did. And so, you know, I've had, first of all, apologize, you know, to those children who are now grown adults, apologize to them for the terrible things that I said, you know, and I expect, you know, a couple of them at least were probably already aware that they were gay. And so here I was, you know, saying these awful things. And so, but we've had other discussions over the years, you know, that I'm grateful that I can have friendships with these children, adults now, after, you know, saying some pretty bad things, you know, but, you know, I believe the Bible. I believe what it said about homosexuality, and so it wasn't just homosexuality. It was premarital sex. It was, you know, rock music. And I mean, we had more rules than, you know what to do with.
It's funny, isn't it, that particularly Christianity, and Islam, I'm sure. I don't know much about some of the other religions, but the first thing that you seem to need to do to your children, because you've got to get them young to indoctrinate.
Yes, absolutely.
If you left it till they were 21 and then tried to tell them about Adam and Eve and a talking snake and eating an apple and starting sin for everyone, they would laugh at you. But you say you've got to get them young. And so the first thing you've got to do is to destroy their self-esteem so that you can then offer them salvation.
Yes. Well, and you're spot on, because the teachings, evangelical teachings on sin, you know, and the need of redemption and the threat of judgment, punishment, hell, you know, you take those and you just drill them into the head of children. We started when the kids were 4 and 5 years old. You know, they went to a junior church, and we had intensive, it's hard not to call them indoctrination programs for the children. And of course they all got saved. You know, of course they did. You scared the hell out of them. And, you know, and then as they got older, that got repeated in youth group. And then as teenagers and young adults in church, you know, they heard my preaching, and, you know, I think of my own children. My oldest boys, you know, they heard probably 3,000 plus sermons that I preached, you know, and so they heard it all. And I'm grateful and pleased that they have actually turned out to be the relatively well-adjusted adults that they are, because it could have turned out a lot worse. And so, it's, and I take the approach now that I think that's abusive to children to indoctrinate them like that. And it's one thing, if when they're teenagers, like you said, you start teaching them those things. This is what we believe in our family. This is what we believe in our church. Mm. But, you're right. They run the risk of, by the time a kid's 15, he's going to look at that stuff and say, what?
Yes.
And so that's why there's so many Christian ministries that focus, like Child Evangelism Fellowship, for example, that focus on children at a very young age.
Yes. Well, we've even got that happening in the UK now, because the Anglican Church, which of course is our established church, because stupidly, for historical reasons, we're not a secular constitution. Although we are largely atheists. The last poll taken revealed that we're 51% non-believers, and that's only those who didn't put down Anglican automatically, although they don't actually practice it,
Right.
Because there's a lot of those who don't want to upset the apple cart, But we've got the current leadership of the church is more evangelical than previously. We've got Justin Welby as Archbishop of Canterbury, and he's an evangelical. And so they are now, unfortunately, the government is on their side to an extent. We don't really seem to choose, or because of our electoral system, we don't get the government that we deserve, really. But the government has permitted the opening of faith schools, whereas for decades that wasn't a policy. You couldn't open, you could open your own private faith school, of course, nobody would control that, but you couldn't get government money to open a school in a faith. Now you can. And they've just relaxed the rules, which initially only permitted, I think, a quarter of the intake to be members of that faith, and the rest they had to make up with anybody. But now the latest rules say that 100% of the intake can be required to be members of the faith. So given that, some of these schools are the only school in the locality, what they're hoping to do is to force all the parents to start going to church in order to allow their pupils to attend this government-funded, it's funded on the local government costs, faith schools. And of course, the secular society here is up in arms about that.
Right. But, I know here in the U.S., it's when I tell some of my European friends how easy it is to start a church school here, they just they can't believe it. But I says here in Ohio, there's literally no regulations for starting a private church school. None. You have a church, you want to have a school, all you do is inform the local public schools where the children are coming from. These children are coming to our school, and that's it. No requirements for teachers, for what books are being used or anything. And of course, that's the same as for starting a church too. I mean, you can, if I wanted to start a church, I could, by next week at this time, have, First Church of Bruce in Ohio, and might not be a bad idea. I could start getting tithes and offerings and.
Yes. And they could have the rules that you want, because a lot of sects have started like that. I don't like this church. I'm going to set up my own.
Yes. They made a movie about me. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called Bruce Almighty.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes. So the latest thing here is that the Archbishop of York has come up with this plan to revitalize the ailing Church of England. He proposes setting up tens of thousands of worshipping communities.
Oh, goodness.
Which will byline, step aside, what am I trying to say? Ignore the existing parishes and its priests and set up churches in houses led by lay people who they approve of, you know. And so one of the commentators in the Church Times has called this plan a suicide note, likening the proposals to the church tearing off its buildings and its priests and rushing stark naked into a world that couldn't care less.
Yes. Yes. I presume this guy's an evangelical.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
So if they don't like the existing system, they'll, in order to promote their particular brand, they'll do anything they can to upset it and start again. So here's Frank again. He wants to know whether you ever run into former church members who still faithfully believe. And how do those go?
Yes. I run into them, of course, locally because I pastored in this area for 7 years. And and then, of course, I will not too often anymore, but, you know, I would get emails from former church members. And I've actually written about several of those letters, you know, over the years. And so sometimes people are angry, you know, they're upset. How could I throw everything away? And how could you be an atheist? And so there's those discussions, but most of them, it's more confusion. They can't wrap their mind around the fact how here's this guy who was their man of God, the man of God. This guy that for some of them led them to faith in Jesus. You know, they heard me preach scores of times, and you know, I ate in their homes and you know, baptized some of their children or maybe even them themselves, and
married them.
Yes, and now I don't believe. Yes. And so I just try to have honest conversations with them about that. Yes. I don't, and my readers of my blog will tell you this, I don't try to deconvert anybody. It's simply not my, I have no interest in evangelizing for atheism. No. But I do want to help people. And so I think telling my story helps people. And so, but I think of two church members in particular that come to mind, three actually. I was very close to them, and they've told me they said, I can't be friends with you on Facebook. I can't read your blog. No. It's just too unsettling for me to do that, and I understand that. I'm kind of like the children that one day find out that their dad had a whole separate family somewhere else, you know, and that, you know, there was this.
Or that there's no Santa Claus.
Yes. And even though I look like him, but all in all, those discussions have went well. I've only have one man who just got so angry with me that, you know, he would never speak to me again. And, but
I was going to ask you about that. Has there been any cost to you personally, apart from these rude emails and letters and stuff that people have sent you, which I presume you just let them roll off your back because you're you're a man of sterner stuff than to be offended by a few words.
Yeah, well, I am now. In early days, I wasn't, and it did cause me a lot of psychological angst. But that's what therapy's for. And I will, I've been seeing the same counselor for a number of years, and he's a good friend and a great guy, and and he's helped me through all that and helped me, be able to not be affected by what people say. And it took some time, but so I'm viewed as the village atheist in the area. I have written a number of letters to the editor over the last 13 years to the two local newspapers, and sometimes on religion, other times I'm very liberal and progressive politically. So, and I live in an area that is predominantly evangelical, and they overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump, in 2016 and 2020. And so I will write letters to the editor, and I get some trouble from that. But again, it's mainly angry letters from people. My children, honestly, they get more trouble from that than I do. They've had people come up to them at the local community college or at the where they work and say, "I read what your dad wrote in the newspaper today," and I've never asked my kids to defend me. And they typically say, "Well, look, he's easy to find, so call him, email him, or whatever, and he'll respond to you." Yes. But sometimes my kids will engage too, and because I'm, John, how Christian people view atheists. We're these awful people. We're child molesters. We eat babies for dinner, and we have no morals or ethics or all of these things. And
we only became atheists in order to have sex all over the place.
Yes. And I tried that once, and now I got a back problem. So, but so you have to battle that, and so there's been some social distancing from people, I think, because of that. Before I retired, I did photography work for the local high school, sports photography, and there were people that they were just distant, but then there were others who, I was able to engage, and we'd talk about this and that, and we just didn't talk about religion, or politics. And
well, that's funny, isn't it? Because they're linked, aren't they? I mean, you've been on a journey from religion to out of religion, but also from the right to the middle, to the liberal.
Yes. Well, and for me, they were inseparable. I mean, there was, when I pastored in Southeast Ohio, we had a huge American flag over the podium, and it was probably 8 foot by 10 foot, probably. And I was very much a anti-abortion, anti-homosexual Christian nationalist. And that got even more so when I got involved with Calvinism, and
you were a WASP.
Yes, there were theocratic tendencies in Calvinism. There's no king but Jesus, and that affected my thinking and my preaching and whatnot. So, but all in all, I don't think it's mainly been stuff that people send me. I've had death threats. I've Oh, yes, yes. One guy from Detroit, told me that he was going to come down here and slit my throat, and there have been others that have subtly, made death threats, or they hoped that I would die, so I would know the reality of hell, things like that. Yeah.
Mm.
So,
So
I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, you were telling me about your psychological problems that you ended up with as a result of your religion and the counselling that you've had to have, and you said something about you still got a bit of OCD. Is that right?
Oh yeah, and and what I actually have is OCPD, is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and to be clear, it's different from OCD, but right. It has some similarities.
Yeah.
And so it's more.
I'm going to try a joke on you now.
Okay.
Don't you think, as an OCD person, you should get the letters in the right order? It should be CDPO.
Oh, well, yes, absolutely right.
CDOP, I should have said. C-dot. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and if you were able to view our house, you would see all sorts of signs of my OCD tendencies. Yeah. And so the question for me is, I have these personality traits. I'm driven by perfectionism, and I want things just right. And
you think that's related to your former religion?
Oh, absolutely. Because I was taught as a child, and then as a teenager, and then taught other people those same things, that without holiness no man shall see the Lord, and we're to follow explicitly the teachings of the Bible, and that the Bible says, be perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect, and other things like that. And so psychologically I developed this, I wanted everything just right. My sons will tell you, I think I can tell this story. So we, in West Unity, Ohio, I pastored a church that I started, and so we had this pulpit, and sometimes it would get moved. And so that pulpit had to be exactly centered in the middle of it. And so, I'd be up there, they'd be up there helping me, and I'd have a tape measure. And I mean, I'm talking about right down to the 16th of an inch, so they have, and I'm going to put those in scare quotes, fond memories of their dad's OCD tendencies, and his little sayings like, do it right the first time, and things like that. And so, like, getting ready to have this interview with you today, when it came time to, what am I going to wear? Yes. And so I'm in the bedroom and say, okay, I want to wear this shirt, what suspenders? I have 12 pairs of these suspenders, different colors, and then we had to go get the hat. I have 13 hats. And and every hat has to match the color, and the belt has to match the shoes. And so, yeah, it's a tiring life, but I'm probably too old to change and throw everything to the wind. I try, but I really, it's the old chicken and the egg, which came first. And, I do think my religion played a big part in developing those psychological tendencies.
Well, I can tell a similar story about teaching to your one with the pulpit and the little stage, because at one school I was teaching at many years ago, back in the days of blackboards and chalk, we had a blackboard that was this wide, and the dais in front of it was only this wide. One occasion I was writing a long line of text, and I fell off the dais and put my foot in the waste paper basket. The class loved it.
Yeah, yeah, I can think if I was a kid sitting in that class, I think I would have loved that too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, Bruce, this has been fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat.
Sure.
And you are a hell of a fella. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say a hell of a. You're a heaven of a fella. No,
That's okay. I get letters virtually every day telling me that I'm headed for hell, so that it's okay. So
I've already lined up the music to be played as my body goes, whether in the crematorium or into the grave, and it's "Road to Hell" by Chris.
Yeah. There you go.
It's a lovely number. You listen to it and tell me what you think.
Okay.
Bruce, thank you very much. The audience, thank you very much. Even if you've not watched us now, but you're watching us in the future when it becomes a podcast. And there will be another show next week. I haven't got a guest lined up yet, but I will have. I've got a number of people who are waiting in the wings, ready to be my victims.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you.
Great. I've enjoyed it, as I said, and I'd like to do it again. I don't know whether you'd be up for that. But
absolutely. Yep.
Terrific. But so I've got to remind people, I'm usually very bad at this, to like and subscribe and to tick the boxes and notifications and comment and everything so that it's worth us doing this again. I'm not asking you for any money. Maybe I will one day, but not at the moment. Okay. Bye-bye, Bruce.
Bye. Thank you, John.
Thank you.